Hi everyone, welcome to the Teacher's Lounge. This is episode number 3 of the Teacher's Lounge, and I'm really glad that you decided to join us here today because this is going to be a really exciting topic, one that I have been really hoping and looking forward to sharing with you for a long time. Today we're going to be talking about the flipped classroom model for teaching. This is something that I have been doing for years in different amounts and to different extents. I can't claim to have done it always the same way or to the same level, and I think that's normal. But I think what's exciting for me about this opportunity to share with you today is that the flipped classroom model presents what I believe to be perhaps one of the best models going forward with the difficulties teachers are facing as we return from the post-COVID-19 shutdown. How can we engage with our students in ways that will keep them from falling off the radar, disappearing, losing interest, and falling short, falling through the cracks, in another word. And I think the flipped classroom model offers the best amount of flexibility, outreach, and engagement. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you today. I've got an article I want to talk to you a little bit about, and I'll link to it in the show notes. It's called "The Biggest Hurdle to Flipping Your Class." This is an article that was written by John Bergman, and I thought his take on this and some of the issues that he highlighted in this article were worth your time, and I'm going to spend a little time with you today walking through it, offering my own take on it, and I encourage you to respond. Put your comments in the show notes underneath, or in the comments underneath this episode today. I'll link to the article in the show notes, and you should let me know your thoughts so that we can continue the dialogue, because that's what it's all about here at the Teacher's Lounge. It's about learning and growing and sharing with teachers about the art and practice of teaching. And today is going to be no different. We have a great one ready for you right now. Did you know that the Teacher's Lounge is connected with History Dojo and Study Dojo? These are my two efforts to promote greater understanding of history, of education, and e-learning, which I believe to be the future of education going forward in this post-COVID-19 era. The more educators can get involved with e-learning and make it a bigger part of their practice, the better it'll be for students going forward. My offering to you today is an e-learning course that I've recently published on thinkific.com. And you can reach my e-learning course, which is United States History to 1877, on studydojo.thinkific.com. And if you check it out, I think you'll find that for a monthly membership fee of a very reasonable amount, that you will be able to access not only this first course, but if you act now, I will allow you to access for no additional cost my next e-learning course, which is United States History after 1877, covering the second half of United States history. So follow the link in today's show notes, and you'll see it here on the screen. Follow the link and sign yourself up, and you'll get not only one great course, but early access to the second half of United States history, U.S. history after 1877. So the article that I want to share with you today is entitled "The Biggest Hurdle to Flipping Your Classroom." It comes from Edutopia, which is part of the George Lucas Educational Foundation. And it's written by an educator named John Bergman. And he published it many years ago, actually. This is not a new article, because flipping the classroom is not a new approach to education. So the article begins by explaining that, this teacher, John Bergman, was coming out of a tradition of teaching that was very traditional. As he says, I spent 19 years as a lecture/discussion teacher. I knew how to teach that way. In fact, I reached a point where if you told me the topic of the day, I could flip a switch and start teaching that topic without any notes In 2007, he came up with the idea, which is known as the flipped classroom. Well, not him, but him and a teacher by the name of Aaron Sams. But he didn't want to necessarily change. What he's talking about is that he said he didn't want to give up on his lecture time. He thought he was a good lecturer, as I'm sure many of us think we are good lecturers. Teachers, I think, maybe fall into the trap of falling in love with their own voice. And I have to say, sometimes I can be accused rightly of doing that as well. He goes on to say, my class was well structured, and I liked being in control of all that was happening. So when I flipped the class, I had to surrender control of the learning to the students. Now take a moment to just ponder that, right? He had to surrender control of the learning to the students. Isn't that really what it's all about? Student learning? I can't make my students learn. I can only provide for them the guidance, the support, the tools, the structures, and the encouragement for them to learn. And what the flipped classroom model does is it allows us a structure, a form, an environment where students own their own learning. And no more so than what we've just gone through, I think, proves that we have to be able to do that, right? When we are teaching at a distance learning environment, like we did in the latter half of this year, we have to realize that, the students have to want to do this. So with the idea being that we could fall back into a distance learning environment because of COVID-19 and future shutdowns, the flipped classroom model allows us to establish, first and foremost, expectations that students have to own their own learning. And the flipped classroom model also establishes us the structure upon which that student-owned learning can take place. The article goes on. He says, I should provide some context. We started flipping our classes after a conversation with our assistant superintendent. She saw how we were recording live lectures with screencasting software and told us how her daughter loved it when her professor at a local university recorded his lectures because she didn't have to go to class anymore. So when we asked the question, what is the point of class time if we make it so that we can get all the content by watching a video? And then the obvious answer was that we could make class time more enriching and valuable. And there it is, right? If your class time is all about delivering information to students, there's very little time left over for the processing and mastery of that information. And what the flipped classroom model does is it allows us to carve out more space in time, in our classroom time, for that engagement and that mastery and that personal growth to go on. So that as an educator, when I do the flipped classroom model, I'm not worried so much about telling them the names, the dates, and the places of history. I'm more concerned with whether they're able to read it, to write it, to explain it, to analyze it, and to show me that they know it. That's what happens with the flipped classroom model. Because that's why I'm there. They can get this information from a whole bunch of sources. And they've probably told you, can we watch the movie? Right? If students are asking to watch movies in your class, it's because they prefer to receive that information from Hollywood rather than from me. Right? So the article goes on. He says, I had one student who, during the first semester, was not really taking class seriously. She struggled to learn in our flipped mastery model because it required her to actually learn the content. She wanted to just get by instead of engaging the content. I insisted she learn the material before she moved on. Sometime in January, I noticed a change in her. She was learning. In fact, she was learning how to learn. Now, that's an important change here that I think we can all celebrate, right? Rather than just try to get that grade or to try to just kind of go through and slip through the cracks, fly under the radar, you're actually going to require students to learn and to learn how they learn best. And you're going to be the educator, the guide to show them how to understand themselves. And that's where the real value comes. Nobody really needs me to tell them about the War of 1812. Nobody really needs me to explain monetary policy from the 19th century. But what young people do need is they need a qualified professional educator to show them how learning occurs for them and to guide them, push them, and encourage them to grow into that way of learning. And it's that warm demander, it's that insistence that they grow over time through struggle that the flipped classroom model allows, right? The growth mindset, as Carol Dweck laid out in her book of the same name, The Growth Mindset, is really where the flipped classroom model can have a profound impact upon student learning. I wanted to take a minute away from our discussion to just tell you a little bit about a product that I use that helps me to make this show, this vlog, this blog, this podcast possible. I like it so much I wanted to take some time to recommend it to you. It's called Blubrry.com. It's spelled a little differently. It's BLUBRRY.com. I'll put a link to it in the show notes for today. I want to recommend that you check it out because it makes podcasting a lot of fun. It's something that I find to really deepen my understanding of this whole endeavor, and it also is really, really great for newcomers. If you're new to this whole vlogging or podcasting game, so to speak, I want to encourage you to give it a shot. Take a look at Blubrry.com. They have a lot of wonderful tools and applications to help you get started in this, and it's really light on the wallet, which is great for any newcomers like myself. So check out Blubrry.com for all of your podcasting needs. So the article goes on to say that another way that he flipped his thinking about learning was when he allowed his students to demonstrate mastery of content by means of alternative assessments. In our flipped classroom model, we required every student to pass each summative assessment with a 75%. I was very rigid on this, he writes. A 74% was not good enough. But as I embraced alternative assessments, I was pleasantly surprised at how students were able to show me what they had learned by having to prove it on traditional tests. Without having to prove it on traditional tests. I had students designing video games, making videos, and doing art projects. They pushed me to rethink what assessment should look like. Ultimately, we saw about 25% of our students who regularly chose alternative assessments instead of the traditional tests. Alternative assessments helped me flip my thinking about assessment. Now that's profound, right? There it is, right? So assessments are the bane of many educators and school districts because students just want to know how to get the right grade, and teachers often will teach to the test if testing is the way to evaluate a teacher. But with the flipped classroom model, you can have alternative assessments because the students are owning their learning. You're there as the teacher to help them understand how they learn best for themselves, to push them to grow into that learning style, and to show their mastery of their learning through the content. I've often told people that I don't necessarily teach history, I teach literacy. And I think that's what the flipped classroom model is all about. What do you really want them to know? What skills are you building in them? And then that's how you do it with the flipped classroom model. And you can use your content to get that skill out. It could be that you're teaching math using a flipped classroom model, but in a sense, you're really thinking critically thinking skills. You're building critical thought. And so this way of student-owned education, alternative assessments, and the flipped classroom model maximize the impact of the teacher and maximize the output of the student. You maximize the growth of the young person in front of you. Now, when we come back into our classrooms after the COVID-19 shutdown, we are going to be in a uniquely opportunistic time to make the flipped classroom model work, because we'll have fewer students, most likely we'll have fewer students, if any, in front of us. If we're still at a distance, the flipped classroom model allows for those alternative assessments and that student-owned learning to really happen. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to reinvent and reimagine what schools can be for the betterment of students and for the betterment of your own teaching practice. If you enjoy the Teacher's Lounge, you should check out our other forums and products available from History Dojo and Study Dojo. Recently, we launched a new online learning experience entitled United States History to 1877. It is a course available to you to walk through the first half of United States history. I'm sure you'd find it enjoyable, especially if you felt like you or someone you know didn't get all that they needed after our recent COVID-19 shutdown. There'll be a link to Study Dojo and to our e-learning course, United States History to 1877, and you'll find that in the show notes for today's show. Check it out. You can also support History Dojo on patreon.com, patreon.com/historydojo. Check that out for more on our blog links, our articles, and other resources that I think you'll find interesting, including more podcasts like the one you're listening to today. So that's just a little touch, a little taste of the flipped classroom model. I want you to try and think about where this might fit with your teaching, how you might use it in your classroom, and don't try and reinvent the wheel in one sitting. Just think about one thing you could do differently if you were to record your content and have that take place when they would have been doing their homework, and then what homework would you have them do with you in class? Where would you have them engaging the materials, and how might you do that with them one-on-one? That's just the start. And then we can come back to this. I'm sure we'll be talking more about the flipped classroom model in the future. And so that is my short introduction to the flipped classroom model. Like I said, I'll link to this article on the show notes, and I strongly encourage you to give some comments about your thoughts on the flipped classroom model. If you've used it, how has it gone for you? How might you use it differently? What have you done well with it? And if you like this, please subscribe to the Teacher's Lounge and spread the word. If you can, give us a thumbs up or like us if that's possible, and try to spread the word so we can get more teachers, more students, more parents involved in thinking about education and teaching as we go forward. Anyway, so thank you very much for listening to me. I'm Tyler Rust, your host for the Teacher's Lounge, and I look forward to having you back here in this space again in the near future. Thanks again.